Hello, I have another background to work on. This room is an interior based on my spooky manor exterior. Gonna say this now though, I won't be coloring this because I wanted to focus on the design and lighting. I have a sketch out already. To get to this point, I started with a rough thumbnail and a 3D layout which I made with Blender. There's some forced perspective going on here. This couch is too far from the coffee table. For any other angles, this 3D layout doesn't make sense, but this is for a 2D layout anyway. I can bend space to use the couch as a huge foreground element, which tightens the composition. Another piece of prep work is this page of props and a section of the room. This is where I practice the rendering style, and it's gonna be this heavily textured style. The sketch initially had vases and vessels to occupy the shelves, but they were pretty generic ideas. I once received critique to add more storytelling elements in my portfolio. Interior layouts are a good chance to showcase that. What I want this background to inform is who lives in this manor and what do they use this room for. If you've seen my sketchbooks, plague doctors are my favorite character designs. The plague doctor living here is a snake oil salesman. This living room isn't his lab, but he would display some preserved biological specimens here. There would be jars of limbs and fossils on the shelf. I'll detail these later. For added intrigue, I laid out a letter and envelope on the coffee table. Could it be good news or bad news? Ooh, mystery. Color blocking phase is unglamorous. I simply used the lasso tool and some brushes to create the flats in the most garish contrasting hues. I swear this isn't the final palette. I just needed to visually identify the shapes at a glance. This phase is where I also formed the layer hierarchy. There'll be a lot of layers here, so I didn't name everyone but named the group folders instead. Wow, that is absolutely dreadful. I desaturated everything based on my sketch. There's also simple shading with an airbrush to establish lighting direction. Textures are another way to tell a story in the environment. The interior design calls for some rustic and antique surfaces. This wallpaper has a custom pattern of tiny plague doctor masks. I brightened the tone up, then a layer above it are some grunge textures to imply age or quality of living. But this pattern was too subtle. No one has time to zoom in and notice the little masks, so I made a new one with a big mask. Clip Studio's symmetrical ruler is doing half of the job. Plague dogs are also associated with walking canes and herbs in their beaks, which I incorporated to the design. In hindsight, these canes look more like candy canes rather than walking canes. I duplicated this design and split it to the four corners to fill in the gaps. To convert the whole canvas into a pattern, I went to the Edit menu, Register Material. Tiling should be ticked on and there are choices on how the pattern will repeat. The default settings will do. Categorize it under monochromatic pattern, then hit OK. The pattern is now available in the material library, which I can drag into the scene. Right away, it appears tiled over the canvas. Clip Studio still recognizes this as a special layer. Nifty thing is that I can distort this pattern and it'll tile itself following the new perspective. Even though the wall will be darkened, the pattern has ominous eyes to reinforce a feeling of being watched. I then aged it with this texture brush. It should be easy to find free grunge brushes in CSP's asset store, or even Photoshop brushes. I think Clip Studio is more accurate now at importing Photoshop brushes compared to when the feature was first implemented. Another familiar Photoshop feature is auto actions. I made an auto action to generate blank layers. I knew I would need a layer for shading and a layer for overlays. This action will create those layers, name them, set the blending modes, and clip them to the selected layer. Simple actions, but it'll reduce friction in the process. When I was done recording the commands, I set this panel to button mode so with one click, the action will do its thing. I haven't pre-designed the carpet, so to save time, I looked for a Persian rug in textures.com. On a free account, there are limited daily downloads and only in low res, which is fine for concept art because they could be painted over anyway. I flattened the image with CSP's artistic filters. I chose this rug because the borders have twisted snake-like lines to resonate with a snake oil salesman. I painted highlights and shadows on the rug to give the embroidery a bit of depth. This tree branch will be obscured by the lighting from the lamp, but I still wondered if it would look good to have something creepy but mundane there. I warped this bark texture with the mesh transform, then shaded with soft brushes. Still taking from textures.com, this curtain I found can amazingly conform to the ones in my design. Just had to paint over it to hide the image. It felt criminal how much time it saved me from figuring out how to contour the fabric, and this trick is fine depending on where the image comes from. Textures.com allow for usage like this even if I was gonna make money off the illustration. If you're taking images from elsewhere, look for terms of usage to be legally safe, especially if you're making for-profit art, aka commercial art. It's easy to over-rely on image textures, which can look bad if there isn't a bit of effort to make it cohesive with the style. Aside from adding an extra layer of brush texture, gotta adjust the lighting too. When you desaturate the texture, you might be left with heavy contrasts between shadows and highlights. Since I planned out my value ranges, I have to reduce the difference between dark and light tones. I found the tone curve adjustment to be helpful with that. I can't really articulate how to use it. I just shift a couple of points in the middle until the previews look right to me. My aim for the style is to land somewhere between realistic and representational. Hotel Transylvania is the main reference for this background, another Genndy Tartakovsky work again. I'll link a page of that movie's VizDev art in the description. It has environment art with low-key lighting and bold shapes but realistic textures. Those are the style parameters I want to hit with my layouts, at least for layouts involving this manner. Since I'm not a professional writer, I can only tell my character story visually. The character was born from doodling an original plague doctor one day. He looked like an ethically dubious doctor who goes on expeditions for rare medical ingredients. It's an idea that made me feel creative to know his world more. The story would probably do better as an episodic series, but the style I'm working on right now is referring to art from a feature film. I just wanted to challenge myself with painting. Lighting is another storytelling element. Coupled with composition, lighting tells the viewer where to look first, then direct the eyes to the rest of the background. This layout is very dark to set a heavy mood because of the emotions we associate with darkness. The light sources are the lamp and fireplace, with more brightness coming from the lamp. It emphasizes the bottle and scotch glass on the table, so out of all the props in the room, these two are the most important, followed by the letter on the coffee table. Furniture near the light source also has more contrast on their shading, which sharpens their details better and draws more attention. Background elements bathed in the darkness have less contrast because they're not hit by light sources. They receive bounce light from around the room. Now I'm getting into the smaller elements like the paintings, which I also made beforehand. These were painted over some real but public domain paintings, with canvas brushes from the asset store. The frames were also image composites. Against the white background, these paintings have strong tonal contrasts, which when I applied them to the layout, I had to subdue with the tone curve again, or simply erase and brush some fade on them. The matriarch's portrait was tricky because she has a frame that extrudes away from the wall. I drew a guide for its dimensions and fit one side at a time. Sneaking in another plague doctor for the wine label, Yeah, it's a wine label and not poison. The doctor is just drinking his anxiety away. All the plague doctor imagery in the room is secretly judging him, and he's feeling the pressure. This bottle, paired with the letter on the table, are the context clues for the drama behind this scene. The matriarch probably wrote him a strongly worded letter about his medical malpractices. I saw this tutorial on Twitter about a stupidly easy way to scribble in fake text. They used this evenly spaced rake brush, which I don't have, so I had to eyeball the spacing. I only have the smaller props left in the background. The skull was the most fun to draw because I just had to refer to the skeletons in my closet. I rounded out the features to reduce the creepiness. This clock face was simple enough for the clock on the mantle. The hardest prop was this shell, and I referred to this 3D model from Sketchfab. I will credit the artist in the description. I exaggerated the shape more so that it would poke outwards, then I matched the texture. The props on the shelves didn't require a lot of details. I just had to make sure that the sections with a bit of light on them have enough to suggest what they are. With the body parts behind glass, I cheated by obscuring them behind highlights, but tried to keep their silhouettes clear. For the vases, Clip Studio has default flower brushes, which, from afar, I made them look like patterns from Chinese porcelain. So, lighting effects, the last step. I'm using this image for the fireplace. The filter effect already makes it look cartoony, but it still has that unpredictable contours of real fire. I duplicated that and applied motion blur to simulate some movement. On the non-blurred layer, I masked away the core of the fire to leave the edges, and it's giving this VFX more depth. I added embers by sprinkling this dot spray. This brush applies particles too evenly, so I airbrush some away for depth. Then, like the fire effect, I also duplicated this layer and applied motion blur. And then this god ray from the lamp. Didn't go for subtlety here, I went for drama. Since it's a strong light source, it's casting this spotlight on the ground, where I erased a section off to look like the table's cast shadow, since shadows are the absence of light. With that brightness, the surfaces the light hits would create some bloom, because light is bouncing off of objects and hitting the dust in the air. I have a brush called Miracle Dots for bigger dust particles. Had to fade some away because it was looking like fairy dust. Placing the character into the scene should have been the first step, but I treated it as an afterthought. I designed most of the proportions in this room with him in mind, so doing this last worked out for me. His rendering isn't as detailed as the room, like how 3D films nowadays have ultra-rendered environments, but the characters are doughy. The simplicity makes him stand out against the details. But really, I just needed a character to display their staging on the scene. So here's Dr. Cure-All when he's not putting on appearances as a jolly snake oil salesman. Can he live up to the family legacy? What's so upsetting about the letter on the table? How much has he drunk? Man, I would love to work on a mature cartoon with this tone and style. As I mentioned in the beginning, I won't be coloring this, but if I did intend to, the coloring process would be similar to my other background design tutorial. If this video was helpful or entertaining, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel for more art videos. Thanks for watching this one and see you in the next. Bye bye.